Hi everybody, my name is Amin Nash,
And I'm Yusuf Nash.
and we're two brothers that are interested in writing. So I'm majoring in English, and I currently do my PhD in Claremont Graduate University.
And I am here to learn everything that this young professor is trying to teach me.
So what I'm going to be talking to my brother about is literary contributions of African Muslims. So what's interesting about these guys is that they wrote their autobiographies while still in bondage. And the twist, they wrote their autobiographies in two completely different countries in the Americas, but they also wrote it all entirely in Arabic.
Wow.
So my question for you to start off, Yusuf, where do you think most African Muslims are from, and where were they taken from their homeland and brought to America? So which homeland were they from in America? From Africa?
Like instead of North Africa?
Instead of North Africa.
Well, imagine Somalia would be.
No, that's a little too far east.
Oh, so we're talking about the West then.
We're talking about the West.
Oh, the West.
Yeah. So data from Michael Gomez. He writes that they came from mainly three areas, which is from Guinea, Senegal, Gambia area, and the Ivory Coast. So we'll be focusing on two guys from this area, and their names are Omar ibn Said and Bakr Sadiq. You ready?
All right, let's do this.
All right.
Yeah,
Why are we talking about these two men? So what's interesting about them is that both of these guys wrote their autobiographies in Americas, one in North Carolina and the other Jamaica, but they wrote the entire thing in Arabic. So what's important to know here is that there's a significance in teaching of Islam at the time because they wrote the entire thing in Arabic, but also shows the intellectual history and overall the influence and power that West Africa had of the entire region. So West Africa at the time was one of the most successful regions in the world. There's stories that they had so much wealth that they would march from West Africa over North Africa, go to Mecca, and just spread the gold to everybody. Not as a way to show off, but just because they had so much gold.
And they like had horses and elephants then, it's not like they had an airplane,
It's just all on feet.
Yeah, they travel months and just spreading wealth wherever they go.
So what's important here is that African intellectualism shouldn't be really misunderstood. Rather, the point is that the practice of slavery simply assumed that the people didn't have any intellectual thought. So slavery and the legacy of slavery, as we can see from the history that we're taught in schools, is that we completely ignored the fact that these individuals who were brought to America were extremely, extremely intelligent, and they had so much wealth and so much influence.
Look at that.
The things you learn. So let's go ahead and dig a little bit deeper, and let's start with one guy at a time. So first is Omar ibn Said. And Omar ibn Said was born in 1770 in Fouta Toro, which today is modern-day Senegal. And Omar ibn Said, he says that he was educated for 25 years, and he actually went to seek knowledge. So it wasn't like he was at home and somebody was just beating down knowledge in him. He actually left his home and went, as a college student, went to look for knowledge.
Like a monk of knowledge.
Like a monk of knowledge, right. So he writes that he was studied under three guys, Muhammad Said, Suleiman Kimba, and Jibril Abdal. And then Abu Bakr Sadiq. So Omar ibn Said was born in 1770 in Senegal. Abu Bakr Sadiq was born in 1790 in Timbuktu, which is modern-day Mali. What Abu Bakr Sadiq wrote about was the process of trading and bartering. And he wrote it in extremely, extremely good detail. So he writes, for example, that they had servants and they would gather a quantity of gold, but they would take the stones of the gold and put it into dust, put it into a river, and then once everything separates, the dust will float, and then there you have the gold. So it's kind of interesting how today, we have in California, there's like that whole gold rush and everything, but they were doing it back then, and they actually wrote it in extremely good detail. So it's quite incredible, So one thing they both also write about is that there was a jihad happening at the time.
Now, you're not talking about the jihad that everybody knows.
Not the jihad that everybody knows at this day. In fact, it was a different kind of struggle. Yep. So it was a different kind of struggle that was occurring that was kind of perpetuated by the Western forces. So different tribes began realizing that outside of Africa in Europe that they could make an economic gain outside, essentially. So people would come in from Europe and try to talk them up and say, oh, you can make more money through these by selling stuff. So essentially tribes got into a fight with each other and a huge power vacuum opened up. So that's what caused a lot of European forces to come in and start taking these different individuals and essentially being sold as slaves. So in 1807, when Omar bin Said was 37 years old, he was taken to the shores of Gambia, Senegal, and he was sold to what he described as Christians. From there, he was transported to South Carolina, where he was sold to a man named Johnson, who he described as a kafir.
What's a kafir?
A kafir means infidel. But he also describes him as not just a kafir, but as he was khalf and saghir, which means he was little and he was scared.
Yeah.
He really didn't like this guy.
No, he's you could say he was a little Johnson.
He was a little Johnson. So he took him up. So Omar bin Said ran from South Carolina away from Johnson, and he went to North Carolina where he was arrested. So remember, when a slave at the time runs, they're a fugitive, and he was arrested. But when he was in his jail cell, he began writing in Arabic on the walls, and it attracted the eyes of a prominent family named the Owens family. And he actually Omar bin Said actually described these people as good people, and that's when he wrote his autobiography in 1831 while under them. So on the other side, Abu Bakr Sadiq, he was 15 when that jihad occurred and when the Europeans came in. And he was transported to the Ivory Coast, and then when he was 17 or 18, he was sold to a man named Mr. Anderson in Jamaica. And what's interesting about Abu Bakr Sadiq was that he actually caught an eye of an English traveler, an Englishman named Robert R. Madden, who saw that Abu Bakr Sadiq could write in Arabic. And what Robert R. Madden wrote was that the man who is Abu Bakr Sadiq could speak English well, but couldn't write it. So what he asked him to do was to write his whole autobiography in Arabic, and then Abu Bakr Sadiq translated it himself into English to Robert R. Madden.
What's the most interesting thing about that is how he recognized Arabic as a language of intellectualism.
Yep.
So he sees a guy that's a lesser man, but then discover like, oh, this guy knows how to write.
Yep.
Therefore, this guy's a statue above me.
Exactly. Yeah. He realized that like not only can he speak English, he can write a language that's notoriously difficult for English speakers. So he was so impressed by him that he asked him to write his whole autobiography in 1834, which he did. And then both of them, kind of published their works. So Abu Bakr Sadiq, he actually had the chance to travel back to Africa, but Omar bin Said, unfortunately, he stayed in bondage, and that's where he passed away, unfortunately. Rest in peace.
قل لن يصيبنا إلا ما كتب الله لنا هو مولانا وعلى الله فليتوكل المؤمنون.
The importance of all this, as we're talking about, is their intellectualism, but also how they kind of practice their faith and practice their own culture that they brought with them. So Omar ibn Said, for example, when he wrote his autobiography, he didn't start it by saying, "Hi, my name is this." He actually starts it with a surah from the Quran, and that surah is Surah Al-Mulk, which means God's dominion. And essentially the gist of this surah was that no man owns another man except for God himself. So his soul and his life should belong to God. And Abu Bakr Sadiq, similarly, he quotes an ayat from Surah At-Tawbah. And this one, I'll describe it later, but Surah At-Tawbah, this ayat that he describes, or it's like a line from the Quran, means that he was saying that man belongs to God's destiny. Their destiny belongs to God, essentially. So the human soul and everybody's soul belongs to the creator of the world.
So like in a way of defiance, both men are saying that I do not belong to a man. So no matter, even though I'm in bondage, like it's God who has control over me and not these men.
Yeah.
That is punk rock before that was invented.
So what's interesting is that both of them wrote that philosophy, that logic that no man owns any other man, but they wrote it through two different perspectives. One was Surah Al-Mulk, and one through an ayat from Surah At-Tawbah. But both of them also had similar connections together. And I'll remind you that Omar bin Said wrote his autobiography in 1831. Abu Bakr wrote his in 1834, so 3 years apart, but they're very similar. And they were worlds apart, one in North Carolina, the other in Jamaica. But they also described, how Abu Bakr wrote how before he was taken, his religion was a religion of Muslims. Omar bin Said writes that before I was taken to the land of the Christians, my deen or my religion was a religion of Muhammad. So you can see there's still these similarities, but they're still separate apart. Omar bin Said, for another example, he writes that Muslims are required to do the Hajj, but Abu Bakr writes that if a person is capable, they should go to the Hijaz, which is in Western Saudi Arabia, where Mecca is. So they're writing very similar things, but as I said, they're separate. And I think this idea of transition or their distance and transition from their homeland into a new land is something to like think about a little bit.
Yeah.
So because another thing Omar bin Said writes that before he left, before he was taken from Africa and brought into America, he prayed by saying the Fatiha, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. And now he says, in America I pray saying the Lord's Prayer. So you can see how Omar bin Said is recognizing that I was educated this way. I was a man who was like this, but since I've been in bondage, I've changed into this. I've become this. And Abu Bakr, when he was taken into Christianity, he writes that they sold him. There they sold me to the Christians in that town. There one of the ship's captains purchased me, delivered me to one of his sailors, and the boat immediately pulled off. But then he writes, but praise be to God, he writes, which was the beginning of my bondage. He have none to thank but those who brought me here. Praise be to God, who has everything in his power to do as he thinks good, and no man can remove whatever burden he chooses to put on us. So then he's quotes Surah Tawbah. He writes, as God says, nothing shall fall on us except what he shall ordain. He is our Lord, and let all that believe in him put their trust in him. So this is the biggest thing, is that despite the fact that they were taken from their homeland and brought here, they still held onto their faith so strongly. And they also still on the belief, the logic that no man owned them. No man belonged to them. And it's just so interesting that the legacy of slavery and how we learned slavery kind of ignores this intellectual benefit that these men have, that the fact that they wrote their autobiography in Arabic, and the fact that they were able to tell their stories, is quite incredible.
Yeah, well, it is, and such thing could educate their masters as well, but they chose not. A lot of them chose not to,
Yeah.
So that's what you get when you think people are less. You don't learn from them.
Yeah,
and it could bring a lot to you. So,
and that was the big problem of it all. Is they dehumanized them and they saw them as an object. And they just kind of ignore that fact. Imagine if they actually worked with him.
Yeah.
Imagine if they saw, oh, you're actually smart. Let's actually work together and create a better world.
They could be teaching their kids, and those plantation farmers could have been smarter people and, have real equality. But we don't. We're here.
But, things are getting better. So what do you think, Yusuf? What do you think about how they saw the intellectualism and how they saw the world? The Abu Bakr Sadiq and Omar bin Said.
It's very interesting because, like I said earlier, they still believe that even though they're in bondage, they still don't have mastership over me.
Nope.
So it is their Lord, it is God who has master over them. So no matter what kind of torture or whatever the person say, they know very well. It's just like, you know what, you're just a man, and I'm a man, and neither of us are God. So therefore, I'm gonna still worship my God. And still get through and screw the man in power.
Yeah, it's very inspiring. I think it's very inspiring to learn from these guys. Well, everybody, I hope you enjoy that. I hope you enjoy me and my brother's little back and forth banter.
Yeah.
So this is our first time doing this.
Like and subscribe.
Hit the like button below. All right,
go to our Patreon page.
Send us money on GoFundMe. What?
All right. Well,
add me on Instagram. Long Beach.
Well, this is great. Well, thank you for this learning opportunity, and can't wait for the next lesson I'll learn from you, Professor Nash.